We will now move on to our second session. The second session of the Huddle 2019 is The Age of Extremes, No Space for the Middle Ground. For this, I'd like to invite Mr. Arif Mohammed Khan, Dr. Ashwani Kumar, and Mr. Shekhar Gupta. To moderate this discussion, I'd like to invite Suhasini Haidar, diplomatic editor, The Hindu, on stage. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, The Age of Extremes, No Space for the Middle Ground. Over to you, Suhasini.
Thanks a lot, Akhila, and thank you all for being here this morning for this, which is our first panel discussion at the Huddle 2019, after what has been a very thought-provoking morning and discussion with the former Sri Lankan president as well. You know, they say India lives in its middle, and for decades, that's not just meant India's middle class, which is, of course, formidable. The idea is that India is a moderate country, a centrist society, one where it's not just about communities and ethnicities, but about religions that sort of flow into each other. It's the home of Sanatan Dharma, Sufi Islam, Indian Christianity, or its own version of it, religions like Buddhism and Sikhism, which in their essence really appeal to universal values. Today, however, the impression that goes out is of an India that lives in its separate corners, a polity that is more divided than others, where the leader of the opposition refers to the prime minister as a thief, and he is called a clown prince in reply. When one refers to Hitler, the other refers to Mussolini. On every issue, from the National Register for Citizens to the Sabrimala judgment, Triple Talaq, the economy, to the current questions we are seeing on the Rafale deal, where you stand on any issue now is a factor of where you sit. And the facts really don't seem to matter. I'm very glad to be joined this morning by our eminent panel, Dr. Ashwani Kumar, Mr. Arif Mohammed Khan, former ministers, Mr. Shekhar Gupta, the founder editor of The Print, which we read. As we discuss this idea, and I'd like to start with maybe opening comments from all of you, on the question of really, is there very little space today for the middle ground in what is increasingly being called, again, the age of extremes. Of course, the original age of extremes was Eric Hobsbawm, 1914 to 1991. But even today, if I could start with you, Mr. Ashwani Kumar, and ask you, do you think that there is little space for this common ground, or is that just a perception, a factor of the media?
Thank you, Suhasini. Let me start by recalling words of great wisdom that I read several years ago, long before Eric Hobsbawm's book hit the world. It is a book by Joseph Brodsky, Less Than One, in which he reminded us that it is in the nature of things that life tends to gravitate towards the center, towards moderation. And then he, of course, quoted several philosophers, including Montesquieu and Aristotle and Tacitus and so forth and so on. But today, we see just the opposite. There's no doubt that we live in an age of extremes. There's no doubt that there are no longer any definable boundaries of democratic politics. There is no doubt that political discourse has been debased and decivilized. And there is absolutely no doubt that all that we see in the country and around us is reminiscence of not of moderation, but of extremes. But what is the future? Is there scope for middle ground, which is the subject of discussion? I do believe in the truism that man by nature tends more to be accommodative in the middle, and that life shuns extremes. I do believe that because civilizations are finite, there comes a moment in the life of each one of those civilizations, certain moments when centers cease to hold before they quickly reclaim their ground. I think we have seen a period in history where the world has moved to the extremes. What we see in Europe, what we've seen in the US, what we've seen in the UK, what we see in our own country, what we see in the rest of the world, certainly we have moved towards extremes. But how fast and how soon can we reclaim the center is the question. And that, I think, is the challenge of conversation of democracy. And I think, before I conclude, I just want to say this, that the quest for the middle ground should be an unceasing quest. That's the only way we can hold the world together. That is the only way we can promote democracy, which is premised on accommodation, which is premised on equality, which is premised on inclusion.
All right, thank you, Mr. Arif Mohammed Khan. You told me yesterday you don't believe this is the age of extremes, that in fact, we are not living in more polarized times than before. Why do you say that? It's on.
Thank you very much. First, I think we must never forget that in India, we don't have the concept of the time is not linear. It is cyclical.
Right.
Cyclical means that whatever has happened is not just a matter of past, but it may come to visit us in the future. And as they say, history keeps repeating itself if we don't learn the lessons of the history that it wishes to teach us. The human existence on this planet has been for aeon of years, whereas the history of civilization or reason, development of reason, is hardly, not even 10,000 years old. For these billion of years, human beings have been actuated by their emotions, by their passions, and that has definitely, deeply affected our NDA, our composition, our attitudes. But last 6,000, 7,000 years, the development of reason has played a very significant role. And in fact, to understand this better, I would like to use an anecdote. And this is a dialogue between Ram and Sita when they were in the forest. What kind of society there was and what kind of society the humanity wished to build. In the forest, Sita says, she asked this question, why the flowers produce sweet fragrance and nectar? For providing food to the bees or for the purpose of pollination in order to preserve their species? The law of nature is reciprocity. That is, if you wish to receive something, then you are required to give something. There is nothing like charity. In this bargain, there is neither exploitation, nor selfishness, nor selflessness. Now, the reply given is, I look at things differently. In the jungle, trees depend for their food on the elements of earth and animals. And some animals consume other animals who eat vegetation. I see them both the provision and the consumers. Those who are consumer entertain the fear that soon they will not get their fill, and others fear that any day they would become victims of the predators. I see all around an environment of fear. And now the crux comes. On the other hand, an ideal civil society must be free from all kinds of fear, and the Dharma prescribes to build a society that is free from all kinds of fear. So this struggle between fear, society full of fear, where the weak fears the strong tries to dominate over the weak, and the society which humanity wished to build after expanding their mind, because we are the only species which have been blessed with the power of imagination. In jungle, it is the strong who dominates and survives at the cost of the weak. In society, the strong feel the responsibility that the weak must also survive, and they must come forward and help them. Why we are saying that this is the age of extreme? Because since last 5,000 years, if the date is correct, nobody has reported from Kurukshetra that now no war is going on. We report dog biting man is not news.
Okay,
Man biting dog is news. And that is the reason why we become so fearful sometimes. Actually, these stray incidents, they do happen. But as far as the large number of the people are concerned, they realize that they are interconnected. They realize that for their survival, they need each other. They are interdependent. Something here and there may happen, but overall, I am very, very confident that this is no age of extremism. In fact, we are seeing that even the person holding the most powerful office in the world resorts to using this language of extreme, but the system does not allow him to do any harm. And business goes as usual. Thank you very much.
And I think it's good that we're having this discussion after the entire the standoff between the US president and the Speaker of the House. All right. This has been a theoretical discussion so far, Mr. Gupta, but you see very practically the kind of discourse, given that you have a website that attracts all kinds of commentary. Do you, in fact, agree that this is not the most extreme of the age of extremes, or do you think that we are living in a society where there is reason to be concerned?
Well, first of all, I might want to make an editing suggestion for the subject that you have, the title for this session. I think to call something middle ground actually judges those who believe in checking facts before making an opinion. The problem today is not there is no space for the middle. The middle is the bureaucrat, right? The middle is the bureaucrat, Sir Humphrey, who says, if you do this, this will happen. If you do this, this will happen. I am not doing anything. You want to do it, you do it. So middle ground.
On the one hand, on the other.
Yes. So don't judge people who look at facts or who might argue with nuance as people in the center.
Okay.
Now, I wish I had coined this line, but unfortunately Fareed Zakaria did. I think in some context he said that today, if you are arguing in nuances, you've already lost the argument. Because in today's environment, and this is a concern, you either have to be on this side or you have to be on that side. So you have to be in this set of trenches or that set of trenches. If you are not in any trench, and you say, no, I'm looking at the facts of a case or a situation or an issue, then you get caught in the crossfire. So people in the trenches are safe, but you get caught. But people, that is no reason for people you describe in the middle, but people who I describe as people searching for the truth, there is no reason for them to be intimidated. So I also disagree, and I'll give you some examples where you run into this trouble. See, a lot of the critics of Mr. Modi would today say, oh, this is worse than the emergency. Nobody can speak. If that was the case, then I'd be in jail and you will not be holding this huddle here. And you'll all not be saying the kind of stuff we are saying. So the world has not come to an end. But that also doesn't mean that there is no problem. But the fact is, if you're not on this side or that, so on Rafale, you either say Chaukidar chor hai, or you have to say, how dare you question Mr. Modi, you are anti-national. But if you are then saying, look, but there are problems, there are blah, 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 Ram is doing all these stories, don't try and intimidate him because that will not stop him. There are questions to be answered, don't scold journalists, don't call journalists and opposition anti-national. They have a right to ask questions. So this way then you get attacked by both sides.
Yeah.
So that is the problem now. So it's not a question of being the middle ground, it's a question of choosing not to enter any set of bunkers. And this applies to everything. Now look at this whole debate on poverty. Now if you look at the general drift right now, it seems to be that the world is enormously worse off than it used to be 25 years back. The truth is exactly the opposite. Truth is exactly the opposite.
Less wars.
Not only have in the last 20 years, not only 25 years, or say since 1990, not only have 1 billion people been pulled out of poverty globally, infant mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, and malnutrition globally has fallen by 50%. This is the fastest the human race has grown in its history. But right now, the mood is, oh, nobody's read Piketty. How many people have read Piketty? This is a very erudite hall in South India. This is not even my illiterate North India, right? Nobody's read Piketty, but everybody swears by Piketty. And when I try to say that, look, Piketty's discontents are with the excesses of capitalism in Europe. Let's have some capitalism in India, for heaven's sake, for a few weeks. Then they say, no, but you are now anti-poor. Look at T.A. Nayanan's article today. It's a very relevant article. He says that, look, everybody is now saying poverty, poverty, poverty. The fact is, between 2011 and now, in 8 years, India has bought 9 crore automobiles, 90 million automobiles. In 2011, 1 in 5 Indian families had an automobile. Today, 1 in 2 Indian families has an automobile. Since 2011, in fact, he said the decade before 2015-16, 27 crore Indians have been pulled out of poverty. Now, if you say this, then one side will say, you mean there are no poor? And the other side will say, you think Mr. Modi has been ruling all this while? There are poor, but Mr. Modi only started 4 months back. So it becomes the space for a nuanced argument with fact is now becoming very narrow. I mean, and this is exacerbated by the needs of the TV discussion, because the debate has shifted from parliament, from op-ed pages, from considered views to TV, where you have to be, in fact, TV now clearly says for this, against this, for this, against this.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, nothing shows the polarization in a sense more than anything else. But there is a second part. You mentioned, for example, that so many people have bought automobiles, so many people have been brought out of poverty, yet these are also statistics. They don't change the fact that there is dire poverty. They don't change the fact that we still do have wars of a certain sort. They don't change the fact that people beat people to death for what would seem like unbelievable reasons in the country. Mr. Arif Mohammed Khan, if I could ask you, there was a recent work on what is called populism now. And the idea that populist leaders around the world, and this was a study of 17 countries, so we think it's just in India or just in the US, but this was a study across 17 countries that said that populist leaders essentially look not for the majority of the votes. They looked for the aggrieved minority within the majority. So, in other words, you do have a majority that you see as a kind of vote bank, but you look for those within that majority who are always feeling anger, who are feeling aggrieved. And then, and in a sense, are the extremes, if you like, of that majority to tend to. So my question to you, as a politician as well, is politics actually driving today's polarized narrative, what Mr. Gupta said, for and against on every issue on a television debate? Or is it the opposite, actually, that it is a polarized society that is driving today's politicians? Which do you think it is?
There is no problem that there are leaders or politicians who are resorting to this methodology. But anyone in recent history, can they surpass the record of the leaders of Nazism,
Maybe not.
of fascism? In our own country, number of people who lost their lives, innocent people who were forced to flee their homes, migrate, only in 1947. So has that come down or it has gone up? Again, I would like to use an anecdote. 1962, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who was a self-confessed agnostic, and despite the fact that secularism, Panditji himself has said that this is not a Western idea. The secularism that we have adopted is not imported from the West. In one of his speeches in 60s only, he has said that this is the Indian way of life, but because of want of an appropriate word in Indian languages, we have chosen to use this word, and he had endorsed everything that Dr. Radhakrishnan and Mahatma Gandhi had said. But I am referring to another anecdote. I made this point only to emphasize that Panditji was not a particularly religious person. He was self-confessed agnostic. An American journalist told Panditji, he was some old friend, he said, Panditji, after spending 30 years in journalism, now I realize that there are not only two sides to a story, but there are shades in between. And Panditji crisp replied, welcome to Hindu view of life. For him, this was the way of life. The question is not how do you offer your devotions, which God you believe in. That is not important. So the only problem is that our memories are short. We are living in the present world, and things, particularly, I'm sorry, but media, it is their job to present every event, every incident, every accident in a manner that this is something which has happened for the first time in the history of the world. It has never happened before. Then only it becomes newsworthy.
No, if I could ask, you're quite right, and there is media and there are other medias, and I don't think everybody needs to be brought in with the same brush. And it would
No, not everybody.
It would be
Definitely
nice
not.
what you are saying,
No.
that essentially things are not so bad, and you brought in the idea of the Hindu view of life, which has these nuances in it. Let me give you a hard fact. An ORF, Observer Research Foundation, study on hate speech found, in fact, that the mention of religion in hate comments, there are specific parameters that tell you what a hate comment is, which is online. And this was just a study of Facebook. It wasn't everything else. Went up from 19 to 30% within 1 year, between 2016 and 2017. It would therefore mean that at least people who are talking about these issues, who are writing, there are of course so many people who are just busy getting on with their lives and working and all the rest of it, but those who are commenting and those who are indulging in what is now called hate speech are actually increasingly using religion not as an area of confluence, but as an area of confrontation.
When you compare this increase of hate speech with something which has happened in very recent past, last year or 2 years or 5 years, the increase is noticeable. There is absolutely no doubt. But go back to the history. In the name of religion, what kind of extremism, what hateful speech was in Europe? The bloodshed, not even between two different religions, but two sects who professed to believe in the same religion, Christianity. In India,
Between sects, you're saying that there's a historical context.
This is 16th century. In Delhi, the usurper ruler not only imprisoned his own emperor father, but he killed all his three brothers, and particularly the heir apparent was made an example. Not only a fatwa was secured in the name of religion, he was declared to be an infidel. And then further he was humiliated and disgraced. He was taken in a procession in the streets of Old Delhi. And after this fatwa was secured so that he can be murdered, and if he was declared to be an infidel, how come Aurangzeb got Dara Shikoh buried near the tomb of Humayun? If he was an infidel, then the same law provides that he should not have been buried.
Okay.
So we have all these examples from the history.
All right, understood.
Can I just intercede for a second? Sir, Arif bhai, human civilization has moved forward. Human civilization doesn't move backward. So just because something awful happened in the past, a bad precedent doesn't justify a less worse precedent going ahead.
And we continue to have aspirations.
So what happened in the past doesn't justify, a very bad thing that happened in the past doesn't justify a less bad thing happening today. Human civilization has to look ahead. If we go back to 16th century, then we can go back to 3rd century BC.
Or even just 5 years ago.
I think we have to look ahead.
No, but
this
let me
is,
respond to
I'm
that,
sorry,
that
but this is classical whataboutery.
Sir, I have not.
I do want to bring Mr. Ashwani Kumar into this debate. Does the historical context allow us to be a little more comforted by, say, the rhetoric of today?
I don't think so. Just because 187 million people died in the 20th century, and because the worst famines were in the 20th century, doesn't mean that we are necessarily better off because you don't have 187 million deaths in the 21st century. The fact is that the lesson of history is only this, that moderation, which should be the natural aspiration of human civilization, is the most difficult test of wisdom. Moderation is something that we have always to aspire for, but history does not teach us that moderation becomes the rule, but it is an unceasing quest for stability, it is an unceasing quest for order. And instead of middle ground, maybe the word could have been the moderate ground, the moderation, the quest for the center is always necessary because of accommodation. Now, we talked about many people having been lifted above poverty line, and I'm delighted to say that it was during the UPA government, 2011.
That's an example, by the way, of polarized rhetoric.
Anyway, no, but it is true that the maximum number of people were lifted above poverty line during that period. But the fact also remains that 1% of the people in India today control 53% of national wealth.
That's untrue.
That's
untrue.
The hiatus between the rich and the very poor continues to stare us in the face. The social and economic inequities continue to stare us in the face. The quest for a better society is absolutely imperative because you can't, of course, we have the benefits of technology, we have the benefit of education. In many ways, we are a better world. But you have to determine the factum of whether or not we are living in an age of extremes from the standpoint of what the expectations of the people are today, from modern democracies, from progressive democracies. And I think the challenge continues. Can anybody deny today, for example? Can anybody deny? Forget this dispensation or the previous dispensation, or can anybody deny that our democracy is being relegated to a kind of mobocracy? Can we deny the tyrannies of majority, the tyrannies of power? Can we deny the tyrannies of homogeneity, which is sought to be imposed upon us? Can we deny the intimidation of ultra-majoritarianism? No. These are aberrations that are beyond, a little bit beyond aberrations. I think the assault on liberalism, the assault on freedom, whether in the name of nationalism, whether in the name of anti-globalism, globalism, whether in the name of anti-populism, is a real threat. And all encroachments on freedom and liberty are creeping encroachments. They don't happen in violent conflicts as in the past.
Okay.
So therefore, the lesson of history is that the quest for the middle ground is an unceasing quest. And the need to prevent the age of extremes to consume us is very much a real need.
All right. Mr. Gupta, it's an interesting point that moderation is actually an aspiration for society. And of course, you've defined it differently. You've said a fact-based, maybe not moderation as the word, but the idea of looking for the truth, looking for the facts is the aspiration of every society. Now, I would like to say that we have on the panel all moderates. Why is that not as exciting an idea politically?
Well, first of all, count me out, because there are many issues on which I am not moderate. So once I am sure of my facts on any issue, in fact, I am not moderate on any issue, once I am sure of my facts. So if Ashwani Kumar says that 1% of India's people hold 53% of wealth, since I've checked out the facts, I'll say that's nonsense. Don't just go by what Oxfam said, because that methodology has been very seriously questioned and found to be flawed.
You're saying inequality is
no, it's not that. Because Oxfam calculates wealth as a net of asset and liability, which means Mukesh Ambani, who has all this value in his shares in the stock market, has wealth, whereas tens of crores of India's middle class, which is borrowing from its future to build houses, to educate their children, to build motor vehicles, has no assets because they have liabilities. So please, for heaven's sake, because it suits us, we embrace the wrong mythologies. And because we embrace the wrong mythologies, we make the wrong policies. And because we make the wrong policies, we mess up big time. Right now, it suits your party to promote these mythologies. The fact is, then the other side will say, but Baba, 55 years you ruled. So my view is not moderate. My view is that now his party is being extremely cynical and povertarian. They are dissing their own achievement of 55 years because they think somehow this will help them come back to power.
I'm not speaking as a party man. Don't talk about his party. I took a particular figure, I stand by it. You may have your views, but let's not talk about parties.
So what I'm saying
is not a partisan debate, Shekhar.
I'm happy to be partisan.
You may be.
Nobody's neutral. I'm not neutral.
The question remains, why is it not politically convenient to be moderate in today's time?
I think convenience is, people who want to be in debate have to have a thick skin. People who want to be in a debate can't look for convenience. If you want to have convenience, be a bureaucrat. Sit at home, go to work, earn your living, come back, look at your sales figures, look at your bonuses, etc., etc. But if you want to be in debate, sure, today debate is much sharper. Also, there are different poles to the debate. Times when everybody said the same thing are over. All right, it's a very polarized world. There is also a certain, you raised a fundamental question, is politics driving change or is society driving change? It's chicken and egg. They drive each other. But if you look at the state of the world today, not every country is a democracy, but you see, go west to east. You have Trump, Putin, Abe, Xi Jinping, Modi, Erdogan, Netanyahu. Modi, Erdogan, Netanyahu, and when you get bored, there is Duterte in the Philippines, and now there's Orban in Hungary, and there's a new guy in Brazil. New guy in Brazil. So this whole world is today run by alpha males, right? Some of them in democracies actually use the size of some part of their anatomy to come to power, right?
This clearly shows why more women should be in the public sphere.
So one reasonable woman who was there, Angela Merkel, is now being sidelined, and one gentleman, Macron, is sort of bravely fighting along. So it's a different kind of world. And what you said earlier is very true, because today's leaders speak to the base. They only bother about the base. The earlier view that you got your votes from the base, but once you were elected, then public office was public trust. If you had public office, you then spoke for everybody. That is now over. Trump only speaks to his base. Modi only speaks to his base. Erdogan only speaks to his base. Netanyahu only speaks to his base. And the challenge of those in public debate now is to be patient, because this is unsustainable, because your base is never the majority, right? Even in Israel, the base of Netanyahu is not the majority of the Jews, forget the Arabs.
Yeah.
So you have to, that you can call it space in the middle, but I call it the space for facts and reasonable arguments. But neutrality is not the middle ground. Moderation in views is not the middle ground. Check your facts and then have strong views, for heaven's sake.
But I think moderation will always be the middle ground. By definition, the middle ground is a ground which is an intermediate, which is between two extremes.
Right.
And if all political democracies and their leaders have to only appeal to their base or to their vote bank, are we pronouncing the demise of democracy? Are we pronouncing the demise of deliberative democracy? Are we pronouncing the demise of representative democracy? And if that is the reality of today, that is an argument to come to the middle ground, so that to accommodate everyone and not just the base.
All right. Is according to you then, is parliamentary democracy the problem?
Sorry?
Is parliamentary democracy the problem? Because you can win with a much smaller amount than if you were, say, in a presidential system.
I'm not going to say whether parliamentary democracy per se is a problem. You can always refine the processes of parliamentary democracy to make it more representative, to make it more accountable, to make it more fair and just. But that's another debate. You asked one question: do the politicians polarize, or do the politicians get polarized? I think it's the job of the leader, the job of the politician, to give a direction. And I think a very major responsibility for polarizing society rests with the people who seek to lead their nations or who seek to appeal to their narrow bases.
Right.
And in the process, they lose track of that necessity of deliberation that defines the quality of democracy.
All right, so leadership, not followership. Mr. Arif Mohammed Khan, if I could ask you, you referred to the idea that we can look at history, but would you agree that at least historically, the language of our discourse has become not just more polarized, it has become uncivilized, in a sense? You've blamed the media, but we are looking at examples in Parliament of words used that have never been used, perhaps, in the past. Would you agree at least that the language of our discourse has become much more harsh? You may not think it's a bad thing. You may think at least we're being honest with each other now.
No, even history, when I refer to history, not to justify anything wrong which is going today, I have only said that when we make statements like age of extremism, then we have to compare that with some period in the history. And in that sense, I am not ready to subscribe to the view that there is today, there is no space available for the
center,
for the medium path. The language, yes. Essentially, you know, I would like to come back to this. That this is basically, the basic question is that human beings, how we appeal to our better angels. We have, the evil is there inside, the angels are there, the good side is there. How do I work so that my better angels manifest themselves? What Swami Vivekananda repeatedly said. My mission is to preach unto mankind their divinity and its manifestation in all walks of life. Human beings, essentially and basically, and maybe because they have been conditioned because for millions of years, they have survived. The fittest have survived. It's only 6,000 years. So the basic thing is that how to control your selfishness. the best way of controlling selfishness, we find this in Indian philosophy, that if you do any good to the other, actually you are not doing good to the other. What goes around comes around.
All right, but this is now a theoretical discussion. I have very little time. I want to take some audience questions.
Oh.
So I do want to ask, Shekhar Gupta, when social media first arrived, when the internet first arrived, this was the ultimate democratizer. It was going to make everyone aware. It was going to make everyone educated. And yet we see everyone in their silos, echo chambers across the internet. In these last few comments, if you could also give me a sense of where you think the solutions lie to perhaps not necessarily bringing down the polarization in the narratives, but allowing for people to have discussions, not just listen to people they're already, whose arguments they're already convinced of.
Well, once you create a public square and you completely democratize debate, which means anybody with a Twitter handle can say whatever they want, then you can't put these restraints. Then I would once again say, there's those of us in public debate have to face the heat. If we can't face the heat, get out of the kitchen. We'd love to see less abuse. And abuse also doesn't hurt. What is dangerous is a kind of lynch mob mentality. You start calling somebody corrupt, chor, or you start calling somebody anti-national, ISI agent, Pakistani agent. In the old days, it used to be CIA agent. Today, you can actually unleash physical mobs as a result of this.
Yes, and
that's happened. The big concern. There are lots of women journalists whose pictures were put out. I'm afraid you were also in one of those lists, saying these are what we call ISI Patrikas, yes, or something like that, or urban Naxals. Well, now, once you do that, these are people in public debate are known faces. You don't walk around with commandos anywhere. So these are physical dangers that this is drawing. Now, can you bring back the perfect world? No. But a few things can be done. For example, I think a platform like Twitter, which frankly thrives on hate.
A marketplace of...
It thrives on hate all over the world. It's now cleaning up its act on bots because the New York Times caught it on its bot economics. But it's really a terrible medium which thrives on hate, if only they were to not allow anonymity. Right. A lot of this abuse will go away because anonymity brings out the worst in human beings. I find people who've said the vilest things about me on Twitter under their own names. I run into them at airports. They come to me and say, "Sir, can I have a selfie with you?" Then they say, "But sir, I've been abusing you on Twitter." Selfie kyun khich raha hai? Nahi sir, wo Twitter just like that I say things, right? So even they then have to calm down because they know that
it's a real person speaking to a real
anonymity. It's a combination of today's polarization, anonymity, and tolerance of abuse for those you don't like. Yeah. So today, if I don't like somebody's views, I'm quite happy if she is then pilloried by just anybody over any reason. Right. We celebrate that. Some of us do virtue signaling, right? While doing the same thing in our own way. So I think it's a messy situation. But would we go back to how it was 15 years ago? I don't think so. Right. Because what has it done? What has social media done for us journalists? I am a Johnny come lately to this. I was contemptuous of social media until the other day. Then I realized that this has given us in public debate, particularly journalists, the ability to carry our audiences with us. Right. Because in the past, when the owners took away our platform, when the owners fired an editor, they took your audience also. Today, I can take our audiences with us. Owners can't take our audiences away.
You get instant feedback and you get a sense of the pulse of how people are reacting. Very quickly, if I could turn to Mr. Ashwani Kumar, solutions. How do we bring this together? Because what Mr. Gupta said is absolutely true. In that survey, they actually found that people said things on social media that they wouldn't say in person.
Social media has brought to the fore an extremely important debate that has been going on between, if I may say, between the European nations and America, and those of us in India who follow certain traditions of the Anglo-American thought on liberty and dignity. The libertarian versus the dignitarian conflict, libertarian in the US, dignitarian in Europe, is something that you can easily identify with social media. The right to reputation and human dignity is the foremost of all rights. Even in the hierarchy of our constitutional rights, the right to dignity has now been held to be on top, which includes the right not to be defamed, the right not to have your reputation tarnished. On social media platforms, it is impossible to prevent that. Now, how do we do that? Technology alone will have to intervene somewhere to ensure that the freedom of expression is not pitted against the right to dignity and right not to be defended. It's a defining challenge of our times.
Right, and we're seeing a parliamentary discussion,
yes,
I think, happening on Monday on this. Mr. Arif Mohammed Khan, you've brought the most, shall we say, optimistic view of our times to this discussion. Do you have ideas for bettering them, perhaps?
Possibly because I'm not literate enough to go to the social media.
Or blessed. Not to need.
I'm not really familiar very much. And that gives me great relief because I know so many people have used me and I am sabse bhale wo mood jinhe na bhave jaggati. Because I hardly know, I never go to the social media, therefore I do not. But one thing I would like to emphasize, and that is the basic and essential thing is rule of law. There is not a single problem which cannot be tackled if we strictly adhere to application of law and equality before law. That is the only, in a democracy, in the modern world, to me, that is the solution of the problem. Is simply by complaining. The moment somebody tries to step on the law, breaks the law, violate the law, then our law enforcement agencies should be in a position to book the person, take action against him, and set an example.
Perfect. So we've got three very constructive sort of endings to this debate. I wondered if we could get some questions from the audience. Just put up your hand so I know where everyone is, and then we'll try and come to all of you. Should we start with the gentleman in the front, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, I think, yeah.
Thank you very much, Suhasini. I appreciate the optimism of Arif Mohammed Khan. I also appreciate his references to history. But I think the problem with historical comparisons is that one must compare like with like, not with unlike. The current situation in India today, if you compare it with the wars of religion in early modern Europe, your conclusions can go completely haywire. What you need to compare it with is the first 2 or 3 decades after India's independence. Despite the trauma of partition, I grew up in Nehruvian India. I know what the middle ground was then. What has happened now in the last 20 years or so, that as a result of a deliberate attempt by a group of dedicated and minority...
Sure, I get your point. Was there a question after that? Or?
Yeah, well, the question is that the conclusion is that the center has shifted, or the middle has shifted so far to the extreme that those who appear to be a little more reasonable extremists now hold the middle ground.
All right. Nice point. Further there. If you could take the mic there. And then there's a table with two people here.
Yeah, hi. So my question has 2 parts. First of all, sir, for your reference on hate speeches increasing in social media, I just want to say, sir, is that with a lot of companies coming in favor or against a certain party and trying to push certain narrative on social media, and a lot of people willingly or unwillingly subscribing to those views. So thus you see the forwards of certain narrative which is pushed by a lot of, there are companies which are quoted in media houses.
Just make a very short.
Yeah, sorry. So coming to the question, quoting social media figure might be a wrong yardstick with a lot of digital companies pushing certain narrative for a lot of companies. That is one. Yeah. Second, can we stop parties using these companies or having their own digital houses pushing certain narrative for them? These are the 2 parts. Yeah.
got it. Could we go to the middle ground over here? There are two ladies with their hands up.
Fascinating debate, which we all try to do. But the thing is that none of you discussed any part of the constitutionalism. Is that an antique word now? Because a lot of the social media, the other media, all of them are bringing out these methodological debates or problems. Where does the Constitution really stand?
Fair point. In the 50s and 60s when it was really sort of, ma'am.
Although trained as an academic and theoretician, it's facts that worry me. And I'm here referring to the use of the language Hindi, which has had its own history and problems, etc. Very recently, there's been an electronic medium that's launched a Hindi channel, and it's used facts by going to a daroga who was the Thanedar near Babri Masjid, and that daroga Sahab has said that not 16 but hundreds were killed, and those hundreds that were killed were not, they were not taken to the funeral pyre. Who kept a head count, we don't know. Why did the daroga Sahab not speak out these hundreds of years, nobody knows. And that daroga Sahab says these people were actually buried. Now this is hate speech in a language in which the last woman poet happens to be Mahadevi Verma, and a language in which if you open the textbooks, for example, there's no contemporary poet. Now where does the rule of law apply? The rule of the law applies, for example, on a great poet called Varavar Rao, whose poetry is taught in Andhra textbooks, and you know how the rule of the law has been applied on him.
We get that, but the point you made at the beginning, I do want to ask our panelists about, is there anyone, one more question I could probably take from this side? There's one hand up at the back.
So the premise of this panel has been about the middle ground.
Could I just ask you to stand up, sir, because we can't.
I'm so sorry. The premise of this panel has been about the middle ground. But there is a fairly well-known school of thought, I think that was Karl Popper, which asked whether there can actually be a middle ground in what is essentially opposition to pure evil.
Sorry, say that again?
What is essentially opposition to something that's bad, something that's evil?
Okay.
Can there be a middle ground there?
Okay. You can't take, I mean, the answer to evil cannot be a middle ground position. It has to be anti-evil or anti-good. We'll go in maybe in reverse order. Each one.
First question जो आपने पूछा था, you know, I appreciate what you have said about the history, and I agree that none of us is responsible for the actions of our ancestors. But certainly each one of us is responsible for the memories which their actions have created. And if we try to forget those memories, then the problems will keep haunting us. 1946, Maulana Azad had given an interview to a Lahore-based magazine, 1946. I'm not going into details of the interview, but every prediction which he made about Pakistan a year before it came into existence, 99% of those predictions have come true. And every prediction that he made about truncated India, India is a big country, Pakistan, everything came true in about 30 years' time, including the partition of the Pakistan. Maulana Azad had said, if India will be partitioned, very soon Pakistan will also be partitioned. But about India, India is a big country. His predictions, they took longer time. Everything which you have referred to today, so clearly Maulana Azad has spelled out.
So you're saying the seeds were sowed even
Seeds
then?
are sown in the history, and if you refuse to take notice of those seeds, then we will continue being grappled with these problems.
Sure. Mr. Ashwani Kumar, you want to?
Well, I'm glad somebody referred to Karl Popper. His Poverty of Historicism, his seminal work, spoke about the need to oppose evil. But the definition of evil itself presupposes a particular view with which somebody can differ. Then Michael Oakeshott and Macpherson and others who followed spoke about the need to reinforce conservatism as their definition of the moderate ground. In every philosophical thought about which I am aware, and I'm not aware about a lot, there's always been this debate to reclaim the middle ground. Of course, the middle ground or the moderate center has been defined in the historical context of a given point of time.
Okay. Could you also respond to the question, Mr. Ashwani Kumar, that he raised? Can political parties at least be held to account and said that when you use the digital platform, you must not indulge in hate speech, of course, but also in fact-based reporting and fact-based propaganda, if you like?
I'm entirely in agreement with the view that no one should use any medium, including social media.
But can political parties in particular?
Political
is that
parties
a way forward?
ought not to, because political parties exist as part of a system.
Sure.
They don't exist in a vacuum. And that is why the warning that has been sounded many years ago by people like Al Gore, the age of manufactured consent and the age of diminishing democracy. I think social media is going to be very, very, going to be a key factor in the way we run our democracy.
All right. And Mr. Gupta, that specific question about, well, what is now called fake news, but I think it's a very specific issue where you can use a mass media to magnify one person's comment, which may or may not be true, without getting the checks and balances and filters in. How do we stop that?
Well, and that circles us right back to the question of, is social media the villain? And can you calm things down by putting restraints on social media? What do you do when mainstream media does this? Every political party today, particularly obviously political party which is in power, now has captive mainstream media.
That's right.
It can be TV channels, it can be web organizations, it can be print by and large is still not too bad, although remember that on the same stories of this so-called massacres of Hindus in UP, two leading Uttar Pradesh Hindi papers were censured by the press council long in the past. So a society has to be vigilant and a debate has to be on. We can't leave this country and go away. We can't say this country is gone rotten, you can go to America. What will happen? You might be put into a camp there, right? So you have to sit here and argue. We can't say everything is rotten. So I will only talk to the 10 people who like me, then I will write something. I can tell you this, and I game this. Everybody can game these things. So I also enjoy myself, and I tell my friends in my newsroom that, look, so-and-so has written an article. Now wait for so-and-so to write a comment saying, wonderful article. In fact, I have now identified about 30 such cohorts. One is a Khan Market Perch cohort, one is a Khan Market Latitude cohort, one is an IIC
You're
cohort.
pigeonholing yourself by making all these distinctions.
So basically, it's only this 10 or 15, and then you think, oh, everybody is saying this. And then people, TV channels would call you and say, everybody is saying this. And I said, but what is everybody? So in that noise, now that story was done, that story sank.
Exactly.
Those who want to believe that nevertheless. I think today there is sufficient diversity of media available in India. And there is sufficient diversity of voices on social media as well. All the people who hate us follow us all the time, right? We have a little joke that Pakistan's ISI runs a very strong social media cell. So there are some so-called Indian influencers who they have being chased after by ISI majors, who all put pictures and names of attractive women. So I have one, I don't want to name others who all have one, so I know if you go to my timeline, the first response to everything is from this so-called woman in Pakistan, who, when I know, everybody knows is. So this is a system that everybody games. You can't let this phase you.
And
right?
essentially what you're saying, and we'd like to leave it at this very optimistic note, that the center does hold, that the medium and the middle will eventually prevail. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks a lot. You've been a great audience, and thank you to all the panelists.
Thank you, Mr. Arif Mohammed Khan, Dr. Ashwani Kumar, Mr. Shekhar Gupta, and Ms. Suhasini Haidar. Suhasini, may I please request you to present mementos to our panelists? Thank you very much.